There is a renewed push to end bracket creep. It puts an added sneaky tax burden on working Australians, and governments rely on it to spend. Now the Teals have put out a proposal that says that perhaps we should index income tax thresholds. Joining me now is independent MP Allegra Spender. Allegra, how would this work, and how much would it actually give back to working Australians?
So people often don't really understand bracket creep. So I might just explain how it works in somebody who's earning a certain amount of money. Say you're earning like $90,000 and your inflation is going up by 2.5% and your wage goes up by 2.5%. You might say, well, look, at least I'm holding steady. But actually, because more of your tax is being taxed at a higher rate, more of your income's at the higher tax bracket than previously, and you're actually $675 short. And your purchasing power, what you can buy in the community, is actually $675 less than previously. So it applies even if you're not going between tax brackets. It's just because how the tax system works. And so people don't really notice or realise that they're actually increasing their income taxes. They get a wage increase, but that's what's going on. And so I think it is, as you say, about fiscal responsibility, but is also about stopping, trying to give younger working Australians a better chance to get ahead, because we know that they are really struggling. In terms of the question, in the first year, the expectation, if you stopped bracket creep, that would be $3.5 billion. That would be back with taxpayers rather than governments.
Okay, so has this been done anywhere else? Is there an example we can look to? I think the UK has tried something similar to this.
It's about 17 OECD countries currently index their tax thresholds, including the US and Canada and the UK, though they've currently put a halt to it at the moment. Actually, it was back in the Fraser government a long while ago, under the Fraser coalition government, they actually brought this in and then they pulled it out again. And I think that this is about, I think countries around the world have brought this in because it is about discipline, but it is also about making sure that we don't just increase the tax burden on working people. We know that, for instance, in Australia, we used to have around 6 working people for older population per person in the older population. It's going to be down to about 3 in about 20 years' time. So the danger is that we are just increasing reliance on working people, and that's because it's the one tax that goes up all the time that politicians don't have to come back to the electorate on and say, actually, can I increase your taxes? That's why it's a sneaky stealth tax.
Yeah, it certainly is. This comes at the end of a term. We know there's an election around the corner. We know that Anthony Albanese is chalking it up as a big win that he was able to abolish the Morrison-era stage 3 tax cuts. That would have removed the 37% tax bracket, which would have had a massive effect on bracket creep, wouldn't it?
Look, it would have had an impact on some parts of bracket creep, and you're right, but it wouldn't have dealt with all parts of bracket creep. So I think that it would have had a place in that. It wouldn't have eliminated it. And I think where I've come, I didn't originally think, honestly, that this is an area that we should, that I thought was important. But I've been, really focused on in my tax work on how do you reduce the burden on income tax, because we're actually at some of the highest levels of income tax as a proportion of our tax take that we have ever been. And the problem is, if you don't actually stop the bracket creep, then what you do is, even if you lowered thresholds, raised thresholds and lowered rates, bracket creep would just creepily creep it back. And that's why I think this is actually a really important integrity measure, and something that I think should be part of any tax discussion, and hopefully we will have some serious ones in the next parliament.
I mean, what is lost, and I know you're talking about the major parties and not wanting to do any big-scale, meaningful tax reform. I think that is true to an extent, but it's not true to say the coalition didn't try. I mean, what is lost in this debate is that stage 3 tax cuts were exactly that, stage 3, because stage 1 and 2 had already dealt with the lower income thresholds. Do you think that's a fair argument here? And as we go into an election, I mean, we haven't seen the plans from the coalition yet. Would you support a coalition that tries to reduce those income tax rates at a higher level? And when I say higher level, I mean, you're in the member for Wentworth. If you're earning, $150,000 in inner city Sydney, it doesn't go very far, does it?
I do know that. Look, you're absolutely right. I think people in this community, are on higher incomes, but I think also have, it's very expensive to live here. And I think people, really are struggling in terms of things like mortgages. Look, I would support any plan from across the board that looks at lowering the burden on income taxes. But I think that why I focus on bracket creep is to make sure that those aren't just eroded away somewhere else. So I would welcome the coalition getting into a proper tax debate and saying, look, this is where they want to see the tax system go. I think this is what people are really looking for, is some of the long-term economic reform so that we are set up for the future. And I think that's actually a lot of the disappointment that I hear from the electorate, particularly from some of the people who would typically have supported the Liberal Party, just concerned that where is the economic agenda that is going to drive productivity. And now it's true of Labor too. I'm not letting anyone off the hook. We haven't seen economic reform out of Labor. We haven't seen yet a commitment from the coalition to really get into tax and get into some of those really thorny issues. But we do need to do the right thing by our kids and future generations. And I think reducing a reliance on income tax should be part of it.
Yeah, well, the coalition did try to do that. So when you say you get the feedback from your community who normally would have voted Liberal, what is their gripe exactly? Because they did have stage 3 tax cuts legislated and then Labor wound it back.
And which the coalition supported at the same time. So I look, my gripe is, my question is, that was, what the coalition had done with the original stage 3. It was better reform, I think, from a reform point of view, but it wasn't actually a broader piece of saying, how do we change our tax mix more profoundly? And what the PBO is saying is that by 2030, the current tax changes that have gone through, they will be wiped out by bracket creep. And that just is the point. Bracket creep is an insidious tax. It's an insidious increasing in tax. And if you really want to set in stone long-term economic reform, then I think you need to stop that bracket creep altogether.
And with respect, bracket creep, I think you'll agree with me, is still only tinkering at the fringes. When you're talking about wide-scale tax reform, we need to talk about perhaps higher income tax brackets, a complete recalibration of how they're done, GST, company tax. Should all of that be in the mix?
Look, I've been really clear. What I would like to see in the next term of Parliament is a tax reform process that puts the taxes on the table and says, what is the best tax mix for us as a country so that we do the right thing by young working people so that they can get ahead, so that they can buy houses, that we are actually driving productivity and innovation and investment in our businesses, because productivity is at a 10-year low, it's at a 60-year low at the moment. And we know that wealth and prosperity is driven by that, and also that we make that this climate transition, the energy transition, as cheap as possible. Because I think, again, we know we need to make the energy transition. Let's not make it more expensive by having taxes that do not incentivise the energy transition we need to make.
I really welcome this tax debate. I think it's one that's long overdue. So let's hope it's central to this election in a cost of living crisis. It absolutely should be. That said, last election we had a Wentworth debate, Allegra. You up for another one this time around?
Of course I am, Laura. I'd love one. It's, I think it's really important, genuinely. Like every single forum I think that I've been invited to debate, I will say yes as the election nears. So I think it's really, really important.
Okay, so we have sent you an invite.
I know, I've said yes.
You've said yes.
I think we're just working on the dates, Laura.
Oh, can I host it? Would you be happy for me to do that?
I know you're from Wentworth, so I think you're very well placed, to be honest.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you for that, Allegra. Good to talk to you, and it's good to be talking about tax reform just as we go into this election. By the way, when's your best guess of when it might be called?
I don't know. I mean, I think everyone is saying April 12th, but I obviously, with the extreme weather that many people around the country are really worried about, that may change. We'll see. Who knows?
I think so. Yeah, I think that is about spot on. Allegra, thank you. Well, my people will talk to your people about that debate. We'll see you soon.